So I got a call during the pandemic from a couple I'd met at a conference. Their 1-year-old baby boy had really bad eczema that had started shortly after birth. He was one of those babies that was up all night itching and scratching. He also had reflux and constipation. And as you can imagine, they hadn't had a full night's sleep in about a year. Eczema it took two of them to change his diapers, one to hold his arms, the other to quickly change him so he couldn't break free and scratch himself. They'd taken him to several specialists and he would get better for a period of time, but then the skin would flare up again. And when they asked me if I could help, you can imagine my relief to be able to say yes. They were as relieved as I was. Back in 2006, when I was a newly trained pediatrician, I would not have been able to tell them that with any level of certainty or confidence. Back at that time, I didn't know anything about nutrition. We get almost no nutrition training in medical school, so let that sink in. I also had never heard of the term microbiome, let alone knew that we had one in our gut and on our skin. We have trillions of bacteria all over our body, and they play a significant role in our overall health. It is fascinating, and it's changing the game in medicine. And in order to help Rocky, I needed to have an understanding of the skin microbiome and the gut microbiome, as well as an understanding of nutrition and environmental exposures. So why am I talking about skin today? Skin and eczema. Our rates of eczema have quadrupled since 1945. Asthma and allergies have doubled and that's just since the 80s. And in addition to the allergic triad of illnesses that are increasing, 1 in 2 kids has a chronic illness today. 1 in 5 are obese, as are 40% of our adults. That is not an epidemic of a lack of willpower or bad parenting. Our environment has changed faster than our bodies can adapt. And our skin is the place where illness often first gives its warning sign. It's like this big window into the gut. What I'm going to share with you today is why I believe our children's illness, their eczema, specifically their skin, is giving us a loud and urgent warning sign. I also am going to share with you why I think this is important for everybody listening, not just those with kids. Back to Rocky. When you look at his skin now through this new lens, that it's a living ecosystem and it's been disrupted by staph bacteria. So he's got an excess amount of staph on his skin. What staph does is it acts like a weed. It takes over and it inhibits the growth of the beneficial bacteria that is extremely important for the health of our skin. So I was trained to treat eczema using topical steroids. And that works for a little while, but often when we stop the steroid, the skin flares up again, sometimes worse than it was before. And that is because we haven't addressed the root of the problem. And I'm going to share with you 2 things that have happened since the end of World War II that I believe are contributing to our increased rates of illness in kids and adults. So the first thing is we have introduced thousands of chemicals into the environment, some of which have been studied for their health implications, some of which have not. Pesticides, herbicides, we put them into our environment and into our food production. The EPA currently lists 86,000 chemicals either manufactured in or imported to the US. The second thing are antibiotics. So antibiotics were put into widespread use, and first in humans and later in food-producing animals. Antibiotics have saved millions of lives, and if you need an antibiotic, absolutely take one. What happens when we take an antibiotic is that it disrupts the gut microbiome. And when babies in the first year of life are exposed to an antibiotic, like Rocky was, it actually increases their risk of the diseases we just listed, the atopic triad, the allergy triad, obesity, plus autoimmune conditions like celiac disease and type 1 diabetes. So although it's true that our kids are far more likely to make it to live to adulthood than they were 100 years ago, and that is in part due to medications like antibiotics, this is the first generation, according to some research, of kids who have a lower life expectancy than their parents. That is a hard pill to swallow. But think of how massively we've changed the way that we live, right? Most of us are indoors, kids and adults. Often, we spend most of our time indoors, away from fresh air, the forest, dirt, animals, all of the things that for thousands of years have trained our immune systems. When we're disconnected from the natural world, that has begun, we've created these overreactive immune systems. And eczema is the immune system overreacting. I believe it's in part because of the synthetic chemicals that we have put into our environment and into our food system. I practice integrative medicine. So I practice the best of conventional medicine plus more natural and nutritional therapies. So it's the yes and, it's the best of both worlds. It's not either or. And this is the approach that allowed me to start to understand how to get to the root of illnesses for kids like Rocky. So back to 2006, in a busy pediatric clinic in Charlotte, North Carolina, like many pediatricians, I felt like I was on a treadmill, running from room to room, prescribing steroids for eczema and asthma, laxatives for constipation, antibiotics for recurrent ear infections. I never felt like I was getting to the root of the problem. Medications absolutely have their place, but it was the same kids in the clinic month after month. And then one day, something magical happened. A mother asked me a thoughtful and provocative question. I was prescribing the third round of antibiotics for her 8-month-old baby boy, and yet another round of topical steroids. She looked at me and said, "Dr. Kilbane, isn't there another way?" And I wanted to scream, "No, we're 20 minutes behind. I've got 3 patients waiting, and I don't know any other way to treat him." So, right, her question made me defensive and uncomfortable, and I'm not proud of that now. But it forced me to get curious, and I'm so glad I did, because it opened my eyes to a new lens of medicine. And eventually, I was able to realize, yes, there is another way, and I think a better way at times. About 4 months after that visit, she's back in the office for his 1-year well child check. She says to me, "Dr. Kilbane, I started reading about nutrition, and I took dairy out of his diet, and then later she took eggs out of his diet, and his eczema cleared up, and the chronic fluid that had been in his ears contributing to the recurrent ear infections was gone." I thought, he probably just outgrew these. This must be a fluke. Could those foods really have been playing that big of a difference? And then I saw this scenario play out hundreds of times over the ensuing years. Nutrition changes led to better health. I continued reading and studying. I started recommending decreasing inflammatory foods, processed foods, sugar, sometimes gluten or dairy. I counseled them how to decrease synthetic chemical exposures inside and outside their homes. We got rid of strong cleaning products, air fresheners, beauty products with toxins, plastic water bottles. And the kids were improving. Eczema and asthma were improving. Sometimes they were resolving altogether. Kids had less nasal congestion, less chronic runny nose, which meant they had less mouth breathing, so they weren't snoring and they were sleeping better. Some of them were handling transitions better, pooping better, less stomach pain. I began to connect the dots. These kids were all inflamed, and all of the symptoms were related. And it turns out when your inflammation decreases, you feel better. All of our systems work better. Our immune system, our GI system, our brain and our nervous system. Nutrition became the elephant in the room. I thought, I couldn't imagine that this actually could be so simple and that we hadn't learned about this during our training. So in 2009, I enrolled in a formal 2-year integrative medicine fellowship through the University of Arizona with Andrew Weil. It was like somebody took the top of my head off and poured in this entirely new way of thinking. And it turns out there is a lot of research on nutrition. It's in the journals. It just wasn't part of our medical school curriculum. One study from 1991 showed that 74% of kids with eczema on a selective elimination diet, so similar to Johnny's, their eczema improved. Another study, kids with chronic constipation, some pooping only once every 15 days. Can you imagine? Just for the record, we should poop every day. So in this study, they pulled dairy from their diets. 68% of the kids were pooping daily within a week. Put the dairy back in, they're all constipated again. So in 2012, I opened up my own practice outside of the insurance model so I could spend more time with families. I collaborated with Deb Allen, who is here, an integrative pharmacist. We created a different structure so that we had more time and we were able to give families the guidance to make lifestyle changes. I started creating handouts, images, all kinds of images and things so that our families would understand the process that we were walking them through. That became my book, which Healthy Kids, Happy Moms, 7 Steps to Heal and Prevent Common Childhood Illnesses. And this is one of the main images that we use all of the time. So we have 5 main triggers of inflammation. It's food, environmental allergies, environmental toxins, infectious diseases, and stress. And they all lead to inflammation. And if inflammation creates illness, it can also lead to some microbiome disruption. So it's important that we pay attention to these. We can never be perfect in any one of these areas, but it's small incremental changes. When we decrease those, that's where we see the overall transformations. And when it comes to Rocky, it took about a week. All right, these are old slides, but that's okay. I had a different version of these slides, but that's okay. So his improvements started within about a week. It took a few months till we saw the full transformation, right? But eventually, the check engine light on his BET dashboard went out. And so what I want to do today is teach you how to start paying attention to your skin and to those subtle cues that help us to understand what's happening beneath the surface. So for my book, I'm going to have to click through. Okay, I created a symptom tracker. And what I have you do is look in the mirror. These are just simple, it's a guide just to help you. Simple questions. So look at the mirror, look at your family members. Do you have pale skin, dark circles under the eyes, maybe bumps on the cheeks, arms, or thighs, distended belly, maybe a lot of nasal congestion, mouth breathing, white spots on the fingernails. This is one of my patients from years ago, and you don't need to have a medical degree to see these differences, right? You can see the pale skin, you can see the changes in him. And since everybody doesn't have access to an integrative physician, I also created a mini cleanse for kids, and it's for adults. It's super simple swaps that you can make each day. And remember those 86,000 chemicals we talked about? Well, 50% of Americans, we get our calories from ultra-processed foods. So just by incrementally decreasing our exposures, over the long term, you start to see changes. And so you track them over time. Pictures are a huge help. And this is what we want to get the overall transformations. So today when I look at skin, it's like night and day from the way that I did 20 years ago. It's like watching a movie. It tells me a story of what's happening beneath the surface. So now when the skin flares, we absolutely treat it and we ask what's happening beneath the surface. I believe we're allowing our kids to be the canaries in the coal mine of our modern world. Their rapidly changing bodies, their immature immune systems, their delicate microbiomes, they are reacting to a world that has changed faster than their bodies can adapt. And I believe their eczema, their chronic inflammatory conditions are sending us a signal, and it's important for us to listen. My mission, and we are wired to heal, and when we listen, that's where we start to see the changes. My mission is to be a voice for children, an ear for parents, and a resource for other healthcare practitioners. And our opportunity today is to begin to transform our personal health inside our homes, where we control what we put in our mouth and on our bodies. Let's connect our medical system with our food system, reconnect our medical system with our food system, our biology with our environment, and our common sense with our science. Because when we listen to what kids' skin are telling us, we don't just heal the rash, we begin to heal the systems that made them sick in the first place. Thank you.